Greetings. We are working our way through the book of Daniel, chapter 11. It is a long chapter, and we want it to be as thorough as possible. So, for those of you who is searching, students, researchers, if you're catching this part, we start at verse 1, in the beginning of this series. Here we are beginning in we're going to do a quick review from verse 31, but we covered verse 31 in the last segment. And technically we'll be working into verse 35. But we want to do a quick review, especially for the upcoming verses. We want to pay attention. I want to point something out as well so we can start to see what Daniel, the writer of Daniel, is doing as he gives this description. One thing we find is that he begins to recapitulate the different points he's making. Like, for example, in Daniel chapter 11, if we read verse 31, he began to talk about, "And arms shall stand on his part." And we showed you in a previous segment that the army stood on behalf of Antiochus. After Antiochus had made another attempt to attack his nephew, Ptolemy the VI and Ptolemy the VIII, or Ptolemy Euergetes, who's Ptolemy the VII. But the Greek names is kind of jumpy. Some references call him Ptolemy the VIII. Some references call him Ptolemy the VII. But it's the same man, Ptolemy Euergetes, and he is the younger brother of Ptolemy the VI. Okay, but after Antiochus attacked the two brothers who were sitting on the throne, the king of the south, he was thwarted by the prince who came and interfered with Antiochus. And this is identified in verse 30, the ships of Kittim. They were Greek ships, but at that time, it was Rome began to take over a great part of Macedonia. And it was Greek ships that came, but they were carrying Roman ambassadors to the island of Cyprus after Antiochus IV had invaded it and seized and took over the island. So the ships of Kittim, as I said before, were the Romans, but it was Roman ambassadors who rode on Greek ships, to be more thorough in that description. Now, when the ships of Kittim came against him, this was explaining how how that when he began to invade Egypt, it said, "It shall not be as the latter or as the former." That was verse 29, but verse 30 reads, "For the ships of Kittim shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do, and he shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant." Now he shall have indignation against when we read the holy covenant, we're making reference of the land of promise. Okay, the holy Palestine. And now, since the ships of Kittim interfered with the invasion of Antiochus, okay, he had to retreat, give up Cyprus, and go back to his own country. But he was furious. And so therefore, at this time, he made a second invasion against Palestine himself. And this began the Maccabean revolt after the ships of Kittim came against him. And this brings verse 31 right into play. "Arms shall stand on his behalf." In other words, he shall have the military, and he shall come and pollute the sanctuary of strength. And we read and showed you, he polluted the sanctuary of strength. He came and polluted Jerusalem. They built idol altars all over the place. we have read this account. We're going to briefly read it again because I made mention of how some of these verses recap what took place before. Now, it says, and the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination of desolation shall be set up. Verse 31 is recapping verse 30, when it says that he shall have indignation against the holy covenant and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. It was the crooked Israelites that allowed verse 31 to take place. So 31 is getting in more in depth into what happened in verse 30. And I'm bringing this out so as we get down further, you will see what's familiar in the language. Now it happens again, like in verse 32. And such as do weakly against the covenant, he shall corrupt by flatteries. Now, this takes you right back to verse 30. How the ones who he corrupted by flatteries are the ones who he had intelligence with. Those who forsook the holy covenant. So we see a recapping, because the writer will go back and begin to add more detail into the previous verses. And we're going to see this when he get down to verse 30. He's going to recap. He's going to recapitulate what took place with the invasion during the time of the two brothers, and actually when Antiochus sat on the throne. What took place with the Egyptians and how they began to push at him. And we're going to read it. But I just wanted to get you familiar as we finish this chapter to understand what is taking place. So we read at the verse 31, he set up the abomination of desolation, and we found that to be true. In the last segment, you can check it out. But again, when he set up the abomination of desolation, what he has set up, if you turn again to the book of Maccabees, what was set up was the abomination of desolation under Antiochus Epiphanes. Many people and religious teachers today teach this abomination of desolation as yet future. And they talk about when Christ talked about the abomination of desolation. It seems like they don't understand or refuse to accept the fact that there's more than one abomination of desolation. The abomination of desolation is just a term used by the Hebrews for a devastating, detestable act that had taken place in the land. And it had taken place under Antiochus Epiphanes at one time, and it had taken place again under Titus during the days of the Romans. And that is the abomination of desolation that Christ was referring to. And when he said, read the book of Daniel pertaining to that, to the abomination of desolation of Matthew 24, according to the context, you will find it in Daniel chapter 9, when Daniel began to talk about the armies that maketh desolate, which destroyed the temple and the city. Now, we have other teachings on that. But right now, in the book First Maccabees chapter 1, starting at verse 54, after you read this whole chapter, you see the devastation that had taken place among the Jews. And now this is after the ships of Edom came against Antiochus, and he came against Jerusalem with fury. And it led to verse 54. Now the 15th day of the month Caslu, in the 145th year, they set up the abomination of desolation upon the altar, and builded idol altars throughout the cities of Judah on every side. So not only did they set up the abomination of desolation, but they built idol altars all throughout Judea. And this is what he was explaining in verse 31. Arms shall stand on his part. They shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. That took place. And a lot of prophetic teachers use this passage to make reference to the Pope of Rome. And it's a gross error. Just like we read to you in the last segment that Jerome, one of the Roman so-called church fathers of Christianity, of Roman Christianity, he declared the abomination of desolation to be taking place back at verse 24. And Jerome declared from verse 24 until the end of this chapter was talking about a future antichrist. Jerome was in gross error as well, because we read Jerome's account. Jerome understood this abomination or antichrist. He didn't call it abomination, that's desolation per se. But Jerome called this antichrist in Daniel 11. He said it was going to be a Jew. And remember, when Jerome wrote, he wrote back in the 3rd century AD. So he thought a Jew or an Israelite was going to take over the Roman Empire and do that which his fathers have never done. And that is another error of, we go back in history and we see the errors of these prophetic teachers. And some prophetic teachers say that this Antichrist is a Muslim because of him going to invade Egypt. And you run into these errors when you ignore the context of the passages. The description and the storyline in the passages is telling you about a conflict between the Macedonian kings, the Ptolemies, who took over the southern half of Alexander's kingdom, which was Egypt, and the Seleucids, who took over the northern half, which was Syria. And this is what the whole chapter is going back and forth with. And people now, because of false prophecy, have taken this out of whack. So the abomination of desolation here in Daniel 11 isn't making reference to the Pope of Rome. It isn't talking about some future event. It doesn't mention anything about types and symbols. Because once you show them, man, this fits history, then they come with this other false doctrine about types and symbols. Okay? We have teachings on the beast. We have teachings on the beast kingdom, and we'll show you that, you're in it right now. This beast kingdom, but this is not the subject today. And it's needful for you to understand, don't get me wrong. But in order for you to appreciate what's taking place today, we have to go back and show you that with the people, the so-called prophets today are saying that is to happen in the future, happened already. So the people looking around for something that's not going to take place, and they're ignoring what the Bible passages has said about what is happening today, and what we should keep our eye on, and what we should be fighting against, and what we should be separating from. So, back to the passage. Arms shall stand on his half. Antiochus polluted the sanctuary strength. And verse 32, and such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries. This is a recapping of those who he had intelligence with and those who forsook the holy covenant in verse 30. He shall corrupt by flatteries. Now, we gave you an account on that when the Maccabees, the priest under Matthias in Modin, stood up and began to reject the doctrines or the decrees of the Syrian government, telling the people to abandon their ancient customs. And when we go further, he says in same verse 32, but the people that do know their God shall be strong. They shall be strong and do exploits. And it also begins, and we're going to read this because we're going to pick it up at verse 35. But we had covered this in the last segment. So if you want to go and look and see how we covered in the last segment, take your time and go through it. And we show that this had happened during the time of the Maccabean revolt. And it says in verse 33, and they that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword and by flame and by captivity and by spoil many days. We're going to recover this because verse 35, is dealing with verses from verses 30 to 34. So verses 35, we're going to pick it up. We're going to look further into it. Now it says in verse 34, when they shall fall, they shall be hoping with a little help, but many shall cleave to them with flatteries. Now this took place with the Maccabees. Okay. In fact, yes, yeah. Just in case, because I know you to deal with it, let's do this quick recap. Daniel 11 and verse 31 told us, an arm shall stand on its behalf, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. Now, we read it briefly. I'm going to go read it again. Let's just pick this up at First Maccabees. And this is going to deal further with verse 31. First Maccabees chapter 1. First Maccabees chapter 1 we're going to go to, so we can just ride on into this and finish this series up in Daniel chapter 11. And let's see what we find here. First Maccabees chapter 1, and I'll begin reading at verse 44. It reads, for the king has sent letters by messengers unto Jerusalem. Now remember, arm shall stand on his part, and he shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. And again, in the last segment, but I'll point it out again, those who teach this is a future antichrist prophesy that the Jews, so-called Palestinian Jews today, will go back and rebuild the temple. But we understand that the Palestinian Jews today are pretty much imposters. They can't trace their lineage back to Levi or let known the sons of Aaron. And whatever sanctuary they build, if they build the sanctuary, it will not be the sanctuary of strength. If we pay attention to the wording, we're talking about the temple that Solomon had put his hands to, and that whom Zerubbabel and Ezra and Nehemiah and the governors had rebuilt. This is the sanctuary in which the Creator put his name in. This sanctuary was the sanctuary of strength, and it was polluted. The Ashkenazi Jews, if they build a sanctuary, number one, it will not be the sanctuary of the Almighty. It will not be the sanctuary of strength, and it will never be clean. It would always be polluted. So the Pope can't come and pollute something that's already polluted. The temple that the Ashkenazis will build, if they build it, will never be sanctified and holy. It will always be profane and polluted. So this isn't talking about them, but this is making reference to the Maccabees. At that time, they were Levites. They had right. They could trace their lineage back to Eleazar the priest, and they knew who they were. And it was them who had, at that time, occupied the sanctuary of strength. Now, in verse 44 in 1 Maccabees chapter 1, it says, for the king has sent letters by messengers unto Jerusalem and the children of Judah, that they should follow the strange laws of the land, and forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice, and drink offerings in the temple, and that they should profane the Sabbath and festival days. So he forbid the burnt offerings. You see that in verse 45. Antiochus had forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple, and that they should profane the festival days. So just as Daniel declared in verse 31, arms shall stand on his behalf. He had military, he had strength behind him, and that they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice. And that's what we just read in 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 45. They forbid burnt offerings and sacrifice and drink offerings in the temple, that they should profane the Sabbath and festival days. And it also reads that they should set up the abomination of desolation, which we read earlier, but we're going to recap it again. Now, if I continue to read verse 46, it says, and pollute the sanctuary and holy people. So the idea of the king of the north, or Antiochus IV, was to pollute the sanctuary and the holy people, just as Daniel has said In verse 31 of Daniel chapter 11, an arm shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. Maccabees chapter 1 and 1 Maccabees from verses 44 to 46 confirms verse 31 in Daniel 11. Okay? Now, in verse 54, it will continue to confirm it. We read it. I'm going to read it again. Now, on the 15th day of the month of Caslu, in the 145th year, they set up the abomination upon the altar and builded idol altars throughout the city of Judah on every side. So they set up the abomination of desolation in 1 Maccabees chapter 1 and 54, continue to confirm Daniel chapter 11 and verse 31. Now in verse 32, it reads, and such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries, but the people who do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. Now if we turn over to 1 Maccabees chapter 2 and starting at verse 15, we could begin to cover this. In 1 Maccabees chapter 2 verse 15 it reads, in the meanwhile the king officers, which is Antiochus IV, his officers, okay, his officials in the government, such as complied to the people, such as compelled the people to revolt, came into the city of Modin to make them sacrifice. Remember, arms shall stand on his part. So he got officers here on his behalf, compelling the people in Jerusalem to revolt against the old customs. Now verse 16 reads, and many of Israel came unto them. Matthias also and his sons came together. Then answered the king officers and said to Matthias on this wise, thou art a ruler and an honorable and a great man in this city, and strengthened with sons and brethren. Now therefore come thou first and fulfill the king's commandment, like as all the heathen have done, yea, and the men of Judah also, and such as remain at Jerusalem, so shalt thou and thine house be in the number of the king's friends. Here's the flattery right here. You shall be in the number of the king's friends if you recant the customs and the government of your fathers, which were the government of Moses, and follow the customs of Antiochus. He said, so shalt thou and thine house be in the number of the king's friends. And thou and thy children shall be honored with silver and with gold and many rewards. So we see here the flatteries, okay, causing the people to revolt. Then Matthias answered and spake with a loud voice, though all the nations that are under the king's dominion obey him and fall away every one from the religion of their fathers and give consent to his commandments, yet will I and my sons and my brethren walk in the covenant of our fathers. God forbid that we should forsake the law and ordinances. We will not hearken to the king's words to go from our religion, either to the right hand or to the left. Now when he had left speaking these words, there came one of the Jews in the sight of all to sacrifice on the altar. Such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries. This is what Daniel declared in verse 32. And here's one right here. The Maccabees is giving us an example. There came one of the Jews. He specifically pointed out it was one of the Jews in the sight of all to sacrifice on the altar, which was at Modin, according to the king's commandment. Now, verse 32 in Daniel 11 told us, and such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries. So being the king's friend, the silver and gold really compelled this man to forsake the holy covenant. But it tells us in Daniel, but the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. So here we have it, like just in detail. We have one that does wickedly against the covenant and was corrupted by flatteries of the king of Antiochus' officers. But Daniel followed up in Daniel 11 and 32 telling us, but those who do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. So look what happened. He went to sacrifice on the altar, which was at Modin according to the king's commandment. This is continuing in 1 Maccabees 1, finishing off in verse 23. Now verse 24 reads, which thing when Matthias saw, he was inflamed with zeal, and his reins trembled. Neither could he forbear to show his anger according to judgment. Wherefore he ran and slew him upon the altar. So Matthias rose up. He was a ruler in the land, and he exercised the judgment of Moses. If one go and sacrifice unto another god, he shall die. He was a priest. He had the authority to do that. And that's what he did, him being a ruler in the land. And verse 25, also the king's commissioner, who compelled men to sacrifice, he killed at that time, and the altar he pulled down. So those who do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. Molden, priest, Matthias, and all who believed in him, they were strong and did exploits. But the people who were corrupted by flatteries, they were those who did wickedly against the covenant. We read both accounts in Daniel chapter 32. We have seen both examples here in the Maccabean revolt in 1 Maccabees chapter 1 and verse 24. This is a gross mistake to say this is speaking of a future antichrist. This doctrine came from false Christianity, that this was a future antichrist. This isn't biblical, that's not sound biblical doctrine. Now if we go back to Daniel 11 and verse 33, he tells us, and they that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword and by flame and by captivity and by spoil many days. We gave an account in our last segment, but that last segment we didn't get into it until later on, or towards the close of the last teaching. So we're reviewing it, for people who might just want to sort of fast forward ahead, but I encourage you to go back and check it out verse by verse. But I want to concentrate on this half because starting at verse 31 is where modern day so-called biblical teachers say this is a future antichrist. And we haven't found that. Now, verse 33, and they that understand they that understand among the people shall instruct many. Yet they shall fall by the sword and by flame and by captivity and by spoil many days. Now we turn our Bibles, if you have the Apocrypha in your Bibles. If not, you can look online. There's a free account of the Apocrypha, or if you have an Apocrypha, please get it. And now we're going to go to 2 Maccabees chapter 2. Now, again, this is a very good hit. I can't speak for Maccabees 3 and 4, the pseudepigraphal books. We can't speak for that. A lot of different things came into that. But as far as 1 Maccabees and 2 Maccabees is a historical record of what took place among the Greek antagonism against the Jews in the early days of Rome. But 2 Maccabees, we're going to chapter 5. He said, those who understand among the people shall instruct many. We're going to deal with them. But now it says, those that understand among the people, Daniel 11 and 33, shall instruct many. Yet they shall fall by the sword and by flame and by captivity and by spoil many days. Many days. And we can go on in Maccabees chapter 1 and 1 Maccabees and 2 Maccabees to show you the slaughter that the children of Israelites faced if they circumcised their children. They were killed and the babies were slaughtered. If they were found having the books of the law was terribly destroyed and the people were killed. So what we're reading in Daniel 11, it threw people for a loop once they had taken out the historical record of Maccabees. Okay? And notice this. 2 Maccabees 5 and 21, it tells us, so when Antiochus, which is Antiochus IV, Antiochus Epiphanes. So when Antiochus had carried out of the temple 1,800 talents, he departed in all haste to Antioch, weaning in his pride to make the land navigable and the sea passable by foot, which was the haughtiness of his mind. In other words, he felt there was no region, no climate, no topography, nothing too great for him. Okay, he could pass the mighty waters, he could pass the great lands. And this was the pride they said Antiochus had. I will continue. Great haughtiness of mind, he said he had. Verse 22. And he left governors to vex the nation at Jerusalem. Philip, for his country, he left, verse 22, and he left governors to vex the nation. At Jerusalem, Philip, for his country, a Phrygian, and for manners more barbarous than he that set him there. So Philip was worse than Antiochus. Verse 23, and at Gerizim, Andronicus, and besides Menelaus, who worse than all the rest. Menelaus, who's worse than all the rest. Menelaus actually was an Israelite. And him and his brother was vying for the control of the government in Jerusalem. And it was them who actually consulted Antiochus. And they helped start that mess in Jerusalem. And you can learn more about them when you start to study Daniel 8. Okay? So he said Menelaus, who worse than all the rest. And it says here, bearing heavy hand over the citizens, having a malicious mind against the countrymen of the Jews. He sent also that detestable ringleader Apollonius. He was a tax collector. We cover him in the other segments. And so Antiochus sent Apollonius with an army of 22,000, commanding them to slay all those that were in their best age. So all the young men, Apollonius sent 22,000 men to kill all of the Israelites who was in their best age, and to sell the women and the younger sort. Now, so you can understand, verse 21 is talking about Antiochus' first invasion, and we cover that when we dealing with verse 28 in the earlier segments. This was Antiochus' first invasion. The book of Maccabees is talking about Antiochus' first and second invasion. Antiochus' second invasion, he had sent Apollonius to come first to get taxes from the people. He came in peace, and we covered that as well, starting at verse 30 and 31 in the other segment in more detail. Now, notice what he did, though. Apollonius, one of the ringleaders of Antiochus. With an army of 22,000, he commanding them, his army, to slay all those that were best of age, and to sell the women and the younger sort. Sell them where? Into slavery. And this is what we're learning in verse 33 in the book of Daniel. It tells us, and they that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword. So they are killing the young men who's of age with the sword, and by flame, and by captivity. And they're selling the women and the younger children into captivity, and spoil many days. So what we're reading in Maccabees is lining right up with Daniel 11. They did that. To say that this is the Pope of Rome, then you got to be saying that the Pope of Rome is going to send people off into captivity again. And let's say the Pope sent people off into slavery again. Okay? This isn't talking about it. This is talking about the Maccabees. And it said they shall also fall by flame. So we read where they were being killed with the sword. In verse 24, in 2 Maccabees chapter 5, Apollonius had the young men killed with the sword, and the women and children thrown into captivity. Okay? Now we're going to go further. 2 Maccabees chapter 6, starting at verse 10. Notice this. For there were two women brought who had circumcised their children, whom when they had openly led round about the city, the babes hanging at their breasts, they cast them down headlong from the wall. Remember what he's saying is happening. So even if you circumcise your children, you are being killed. And that's what he was explaining. They that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword, by flame, by captivity, and by spoil. But notice, what else did they do with these? What else did they do with the Israelites who had understanding? Verse 11. And others that had run together into caves nearby to keep the Sabbath day secretly, being discovered to Philip, were burnt together, because they made a conscience to help themselves for the honor of the most sacred day. So those who understood among the people, they were burnt. They were, just like he said, they fell by flame. The young men were slain by the sword. The women and children were thrown into captivity, just like Daniel 11 and 33 is explaining. But that's not it. Notice chapter 7, verses 1 through 5 in 2 Maccabees. It came to pass also that 7 brethren with their mother were taken and compelled by the king against the law to taste swine's flesh, and were tormented with scourges and whips. And we learn it, circumcising your children. The Israelites was killed for doing that. Keeping the Sabbath day, they were burnt. All right? Not eating swine's flesh. What happened? Let's see if they fell by flame as well. They were tormented with scourges and whips. But one of them that spake first said thus, What wouldest thou ask or learn of us? We are ready to die, rather than to transgress the laws of our fathers. Then the king, being in a rage, commanded pans and cauldrons to be made hot. What do you heat up pans with? Flames. So when Daniel's talking in Daniel 11 and verse 33, he's speaking in detail. They shall literally fall by flame. They shall be set afire. They shall literally be thrown into captivity. They shall literally die by the sword. So the king was upset. He commanded pans and cauldrons to be made hot, which went forth being heated. He commanded to cut out the tongue of him that spake first, and to cut off the uttermost parts of his body, the rest of his brother and mother looking on. Now when he was thus maimed in all his members, he commanded him, being yet alive, to be brought to the fire, and to be fried in the pan. And as the vapor of the pan was for a good space dispersed, they exhorted one another with the mother to die manfully, saying thus. And they said their prayer to encourage them that if they got to die for the law, then they got to die for the law. Fulfilling Daniel 11 and 33. They shall fall by flame. They were fried in frying pans. They were burnt with fire. They shall fall by the sword. The young men were being slain by the sword and by captivity. The women and children were being led off into captivity. Just like Daniel said it, the record is in 2 Maccabees, reading from chapter 5 to chapter 7. Now we go back to Daniel 34. Daniel 34. Daniel chapter 11 and verse 34. Notice this. Now when they shall fall, you see all of this terror upon the people. Okay, and this goes back into verse 31 as well. Those who are strong, they shall, and those who know their God shall be strong and do exploits. So this is what we're reading. He's just getting further detail. Now, verse 34 reads, Now when they shall fall, when the people are being slaughtered like this, they shall be hoping with a little help. But many shall cleave to them with flatteries. Now, if this is the Pope of Rome, these people don't have a clue what the little help is. So they say they're going to flee off to some wilderness in Sinai. They flee into some wilderness somewhere to escape this terrible time. What is the little help? And you're going to have a multitude of interpretations. They don't know. They're making it up. But what we see here, we can find this in history. Were the people hoping with the little help? Notice this. When they are fallen and being slain, which we just read. Let's go to 1 Maccabees chapter 2. 1 Maccabees chapter 2. Let's see here. 1 Maccabees 2. Let's see what we can find. I think we can find this in history as well. Because we have people call to leave on our line when we do different teachings, and they say, well, you know what? What about Daniel 11? I said, yeah, we're going to get to that. And until we revise Daniel 12, we got a teaching on Daniel 12 on our YouTube page. Verse by verse, Daniel 12. And we also have one by Daniel 11. And you have one of these teachers, we say it over and over again, because we letting people know, man, you have one of these teachers who tried to get us out of Chicago, okay? You had this short teacher, long white beard, okay? I forget the exact name of the group, but they call him Marlin. He wanted all of our videos to be pulled down that was dealing with these topics. And we recorded him in one of the teachings. And I'm going to show you, it got to hit a nerve because he couldn't ignore it. To the point where that, yeah, he got to send out, have an attorney send a letter to us to try to have a lawsuit talking about it was a defamation of character and using his footage. So now if you watch his videos, he got this disclaimer up top. Okay, that's all comes from his false doctrine being exposed. So you see the videos, he got this disclaimer up top. That's because of his falseness. And that's what he's going to do. He's not going to honestly search, not yet, maybe in the future he will. But to defend that doctrine, which is a monstrosity and gross error, he's just going to make sure no one could, take his video footage without a fight. So we have teachings to show you that people saying, man, this is the future. What about Daniel 11? Here we are. We in Daniel 11. Here we are. And so far, this is not happening in the Maccabees. Now, verse 34, we continue. Now, when they shall fall, we've been reading that they were falling. They shall be hoping with a little help. They shall be hoping with a little help. So, 1 Maccabees 2 and 27. Notice what happened during these days. And Matthias cried throughout the cities with a loud voice, saying, whosoever is zealous of the law and maintaineth the covenant, let him follow me. So when all of this terror was going on, people dying, when it began to fall out, emboldened, Matthias, which is Judas Maccabee daddy, said, everybody who is zealous after the law, those who love the law, follow me. Now, because the people were falling and being killed, what did they have to do? And verse 28, so he and his sons fled into the mountains and left all that ever they had in the city. Now notice verse 29. Remember, in Daniel 11 and 34, now, when they shall fall, they shall be hoping with a little help. Notice, now, Matthias and the guerrilla warriors, these warlords of the house of Levi, flees into the mountains and telling everyone who want help, because there was a small band. That's why the scriptures say a little. They should be hoping with a little help. The Maccabean warriors wasn't a multitude. It was a small band of skilled warlords. And they're fleeing into the mountains. And they're telling anyone who want help. That's what he's saying. Anyone who's zealous after the law, follow me. Anybody who want help, there's hope. Follow us. Just as Daniel is explaining, now when they shall fall, they shall be hoping with a little help. We're not finished. We're going to prove it. So Matthias said, follow me. And they left the city and fled into the mountains. Verse 29. Then many that sought after justice and judgment, anyone who wanted help, went down into the wilderness to dwell there. They went into the mountains. They went into the wilderness to dwell there. Both they and their children and their wives and their cattle, because afflictions increased sore upon them. Now, some was heading to the wilderness and got caught. Some failed. Some didn't. We're going to show you they were hoping with a little help. Verse 42. Then came there unto him a company of Assyrians, who were mighty men of Israel, even all such as were voluntarily devoted unto the law. So more coming down in the mountains. Some got caught, some making it. So these Assyrians came down to the Maccabees. These men were devoted to the law. Verse 43, also all they that fled for persecution joined themselves unto them and were stayed unto them. Just like Daniel explained, they stayed unto who? Matthias and his sons, the Maccabees. They were hoping with a little help. All those who fled for persecution joined themselves unto them and were a stay unto them. So verse 43 in 1 Maccabees chapter 2 is confirming Daniel 11 and 34. Now when they shall fall, they shall be hoping with a little help. We're going to deal with who clung to them in flatteries in a minute. But they shall be hoping with a little help. And it continues to say, verse 44, so they joined their forces and smote sinful men in their anger and wicked men in their wrath, but the rest fled to the heathen for succor. So some fleeing to the Maccabees for help, other ones is desert man and they going to join unto the Greeks. But Daniel is explaining. We're going to show you who I told you they fled to Matthias and the Maccabees. And we're going to show you how the people wrote about the Maccabees. Now, let's go into chapter 3. 1 Maccabees chapter 3. Matthias had died. Now, 1 Maccabees chapter 3, verse 1 reads, Then his son Judas, called Maccabeus, rose up in his stead, and all his brethren helped him. And so did all they that held with his father. And they fought with cheerfulness the battle of Israel. They were hoping with a little help. This was the help, the Maccabees. Daniel 11 and 34 is talking about the Maccabean fighters. So they fought with cheerfulness the battle of Israel. So he got his people great honor and put on a breastplate as a giant, talking about Judas, and girt his warlike harness about him. And he made battles, protecting the host with his sword. Remember, in verse 43 in chapter 2 of 1 Maccabees, everyone who was facing persecution fled and joined unto the Maccabees. Now we go into 1 Maccabees 3 and verse 3. It tells us Judas put on a warlike harness about him, and he made battles, protecting the host with his sword. They were the little help. In his acts, he was like a lion, and like a lion whelp, roaring for his prey. For he pursued the wicked, and sought them out, and burnt up those that vexed his people. Wherefore the wicked shrunk for fear of him, and all the workers of iniquity were troubled, because salvation prospered in his hand. The salvation of the Creator, the salvation of Yah, prospered in the hand of Judas Maccabees. He protected his people with his sword. Verse 7. He grieved also many kings and made Jacob glad with his acts, and his memorial is blessed forever. Moreover, he went through the cities of Judah, destroying the ungodly out of them, and turning away wrath from Israel, so that he was renowned unto the utmost parts of the earth, and he received unto him such as were ready to perish. He received unto him such as was ready to perish, confirming Daniel 11 and 34. Now when they shall fall, when the Israelites shall fall, they shall be hoping with a little help. Salvation prospered in the hand of the Maccabees. But many shall cleave to them with flatteries. Many shall cleave to the Maccabees with flatteries. Notice in chapter 5, what happened? 1 Maccabees chapter 5. Yes, Judas got a heck of a reputation. Yes, people are going to join them because of what they can get out the deal. Just through flattery. Not because they really believe, but just through flattery. They joined Judas and the Maccabees. And we're going to read this briefly. 1 Maccabees 5 and 55. 1 Maccabees 5 and 55. Starting at, let's see, yep, 1 Maccabees 5 and 55 reads, Now what time as Judas and Jonathan were in the land of Gilead, and Simon his brother in Galilee before Ptolemaeus, Joseph the son of Zacharias and Azarias, captains of the garrisons, heard of the valiant acts and warlike deeds which they had done. Okay, so they heard of his reputation. Wherefore they said, Let us also get us a name, and go forth, and go fight against the heathen that are round about us. So they wanted to get a name for themselves as well. Verse 58. So when they had given charge unto the garrison that was with them, they went towards Emnea. Verse 59. Then came Gorgias and his men out of the city to go fight against them. And so it was that Joseph and Azarias were put to flight and pursued unto the borders of Judah, and were slain, that they of the people of Israel, about 2,000 men. Thus was there a great overthrow among the children of Israel, because they were not obedient unto Judas and his brother, but thought to do some valiant act. So they cleaved to him with flatteries, but they didn't want to follow the order of the warlords. They figured that they're going to do their own thing. So just as he said, many cleaved to them with flatteries, right? And so they were slain because they didn't want to listen to Judas and his brother. They wanted to do some valiant act themselves, to get themselves a name by joining with them. And it also reads, Howbeit the man Judas and his brother were greatly renowned in the sight of all Israel, and of all the heathen whatsoever their name was heard of, insomuch as the people assembled unto them with joyful acclamations. Now, that was one group that clung to them with flatteries. Let's go to, just look at another one briefly. 2 Maccabees. You're going to get more of these jokers who are going to join with Judas and them, but their heart isn't after the law. Their heart is after themselves. But because of the reputation of Judas, they cleaving unto them with flattery. So these guys got overturned. They just wanted to join to make a name for themselves. And here in 2 Maccabees 12 and verse 36, 12 and verse 36 tells us, Now when they that were with Gorgias had fought long and were weary, Judas called upon the Lord that he should show himself to be their helper and leader of the battle. And with that he began in his own language and sung psalms with a loud voice, and rushing unawares upon Gorgias' men, he put them to flight. So Judas gathered his hosts and came to the city of Edom, And when the seventh day came, they purified themselves, as was the custom was, and kept the Sabbath in the same place. And upon the day following, as use had been, Judas and his company came to take up the bodies of them that were slain, and to bury them with their kinsmen in their father's grave. So after that battle, some of the men were slain. They kept the Sabbath. They came back to get some of the bodies. Notice what they found. Verse 40. Now under the coats of every one that was slain, they found things consecrated to the idols of the Jamnites, which is forbidden the Jews by the law. Then every man saw that this was why, or this was the cause wherefore they were slain. All men therefore praising the Lord, the righteous judge who had opened the things that were hid. More men joined unto them with flatteries. These men had idols, they taken spoils as they slaying the heathen. They joined unto Judas because he was whooping tail, and that's the only reason why they joined on, for their own selfish ambitions. So just as Daniel 11 and 34 claim, this is what happened. Period. All of this has happened during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. Not the Pope of Rome, but Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, we go on to verse 35. It says in verse 35, and some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them and to purge, and to make them white, even to the time of the end, but is yet for a time appointed. Now, verse 35 is recapping what? Verse 35 is recapping verse 34, is recapping verse 33, them falling by the flame and sword, is recapping technically all the way up to verse 31. All right? So those with understanding did fall. The people who were strong. But they did it to purge and to make others hang in there. They did it to be a witness, to purge and make others white. Speaking of their own sacrifice, because they understood the prophetic language of the righteous, obtaining white robes if they are obedient, even unto death. Now, we give one account of this for time in 2 Maccabees chapter 6, and we're going to move forward. Showing this has all happened, man. This has all happened. 2 Maccabees chapter 6, starting at verse 18. 2 Maccabees 6 and verse 18. It reads, Eleazar, one of the principal scribes, an aged man, and of a well-favored countenance, was constrained to open his mouth and to eat swine's flesh. But he choosing rather to die gloriously than to live stained. Remember, those with understanding shall fall and try them and to purge and to make them white. So he didn't want to be stained, and we're going to learn he didn't want others to be stained. Didn't want the white garments to be stained. So he said he choosing rather to die gloriously than to live stained with such an abomination, spit it forth, and came of his own accord to the torment. As it behooved him to come, that are resolute to stand out against such things as are not lawful, for love of life to be tasted. Just because you love your life, do not go out and do things unlawful, okay? Verse 21, but they that have the charge of the wicked feast, for the old acquaintance they had with the man, taking him aside, besought him to bring flesh of his own provision. So those who knew Eleazar, the men who was in charge of having people eat swine, they knew Eleazar. And they said, okay, Eleazar, eat meat of your own provision. Eat clean meat. So it even looked like you just ate pig, so we don't have to kill you. So they besought him to bring flesh of his own provision. such as was lawful for him to use, to make as if he did eat of the flesh taken from the sacrifice commanded by the king. So it just looked like you eating pig. Like Saul said, avoid the very appearance of evil. But they're trying to make it look like he ate pig. Verse 22, that in doing so he might be delivered from death. And for the old friendship with them find favor. But he began to consider discreetly, and as became his age, and the excellency of his ancient years, and the honor of his gray hair, whereunto he was come, and his most honest education from a childhood, or rather the holy law made and given by God. Therefore he answered accordingly, and willed them straightway to send him to the grave. Eleazar said, nah, I don't even want to pretend like I'm doing nothing wicked. Because remember, Daniel said, some of them with understanding shall fall to try them, to purge and to make them white, even unto the time of the end. So you got those who are going to be dying, okay, as witnesses and as examples to make others white. So Eleazar said, you know what, send me to the grave. Verse 24. For it becometh not our age, said he, in any wise to dissemble, whereby many young persons might think that Eleazar, being 80 years old and 10, were now gone to a strange religion. And so they, through my hypocrisy and desire to live a little time and a moment longer, should be deceived by me, and I get a stain to mine old age and make it abominable. For though for the present time I should be delivered from the punishment of men, yet should I not escape the hand of the Almighty, neither alive nor dead. Wherefore now manfully changing this life, I will show myself such as one as my age requireth, and leave a notable example to as be young to die willingly and courageously for the honorable holy laws. And when he had said these words, immediately he went to the torment. Immediately he went to the torment. Verse 29. They that led him, changing the goodwill they bear him a little before into hatred, because of the foresaid speech, proceeded, as they thought, from a desperate mind. But when he was ready to die with stripes, he groaned and said, it is manifest unto the Lord that hath the holy knowledge, that whereas I might have been delivered from death, I now endure sore pains in body by being beaten, but in soul am well content to suffer these things, because I fear him. And thus this man died, leaving his death for an example. Leaving his death for an example of a noble courage and of a memorial of virtue, not only to young men, but to all his nation. Just as Daniel said in Daniel 11 and 35. Some of them of understanding shall fall to try them, and to purge, and to make them white. So he wanted to make other people have courage, and to make their garments white as well. He had to be an example to show I'm willing to die for the holy law. Verse by verse, in detail, we see this is lining right up with history, the book of Maccabees, and now we're dealing in history, and it's lining right up with Antiochus and the Maccabean revolt. This takes us into verse 36. And the king of the south shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined shall be done. He shall prosper until this terrible time that the Creator sent upon the Israelites is to be accomplished. Okay? And This is where you get your 2,300 days from. This is where you get your 1,260 days and your 1,335 days. Okay, this is 2,300 days is ranging from the reign or the first assault against the temple with Menelaus to the end of Antiochus Epiphanes. Like he did according to his will, and until his indignation be accomplished. Now we go to 1 Maccabees chapter 1, because it said he's recapping in verse 36, and the king should do according to his will. Yes, he's taking you all the way back up to verse 31. Arm shall stand on his part. It's just recapping, just reviewing this event, get more detail. So yes, he should do according to his will. Or verse 31 told us, arm shall stand on his part. Okay? And if we go to 1 Maccabees now, 1 Maccabees chapter 1, and he says here, he shall magnify himself above every god. Yes. Notice, this was the decree. Understand what he's saying. This was the decree. He magnified himself above all the gods of the nations by telling them to forsake their God and listen to him. He was Antiochus the illustrious. Antiochus, the so-called Epiphanes, the god. And he commanded all the nations to forsake their gods by exalting himself, saying, keep my commandments. And this is what we had read already, but we're going to read it again. And 1 Maccabees 1. 1 Maccabees chapter 1 and verse 41. 1 Maccabees chapter 1 and verse 41 reads, moreover, King Antiochus wrote to his whole kingdom that all should be one people and everyone should leave his laws. So all the heathen agreed according to the commandment of the king. He exalted himself above all the laws and commandments and religion of every other god. And we're going to confirm it, because we're going to go right to 1 Maccabees 2 and 19. So he told all of the nations to forsake their laws. And what did Matthias say about that? 1 Maccabees 2:19. Then Matthias answered and spake with a loud voice, though all the nations that are under the king's dominion obey him, and fall away every one from the religion of their fathers, or the gods of their fathers, and give consent unto his commandment, yet will I and my sons and my brethren walk in the covenant of our fathers. So Matthias showed that all of the nations forsook their gods, because Antiochus declared himself to be above all their gods by doing away with their religion, saying you need to obey me. Okay? This is the exact same thing that took place in 36. And he shall prosper until the indignation be accomplished. Verse 37. Verse 37. It reads, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. He had magnified himself above all gods by telling all the nations who worship these gods, the heck with those gods. Keep the commandment that I'm giving you. He exalted himself above all gods. And people read this here, well, Antioch, the Pope, they celibate, and, they shall not marry. First of all, in verse 38, don't mention anything about marriage. But I'm going to read something to you out of a history record by John. It's called the Hebrew Commonwealth. And we're going to go to chapter 10 under Antiochus Epiphanes. Chapter 10, Antiochus Epiphanes. I'm going to show, this isn't talking about marrying women, number one. But before I go and show you another point in this, I'm going to just show you how Antiochus looked at women anyway. He didn't regard women. Okay? And he's here in chapter 10 under the Hebrew Commonwealth. This is a record of Antiochus and how he celebrated his festivals and everything like that. But notice this. He outdid all his predecessors in the splendor of the games which he celebrated at Daphne, in honor of Jupiter Olympus. But his conduct was so ridiculous that foreigners who were present thought him insane. Yet he was so strict to exclude all females from the exhibition. So Antiochus discriminated against women, number one. He didn't even let women in his exhibitions. You know, when he was doing things, all men. But verse 38, Daniel 11, is not even necessarily talking about his exhibitions. Notice in verse 38. In verse 37. Verse 37 isn't talking about his exhibitions. But it is showing how he regarded women. He didn't. That's not to say he didn't get married. Okay? He discriminated against women. This is not talking about his sexual preference here in verse 37, like many try to make it be to fit their doctrine. But if we put verse 37 with everything else, what is it talking about? He shall not regard the God of his fathers. We're talking about deities. From verses 36 and 37 and 38 and 39, he's talking about now Antiochus in comparison with the gods of the lands. Verse 36 is explaining, he shall exalt himself above every god. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers. Now, who was the God of his fathers? Antiochus was a Syrian. Number one, we need before we can understand that, who was the God of his fathers, let's understand that he was a Syrian. And I'm going to read to you just an account. And this is out of chapter 15. The Seleucid capital moved west to Antioch. And this is from Associates for Scriptural Knowledge. Okay? The Seleucid capital moved west to Antioch, chapter 15. Notice this account. And this is being quoted from Oriental Religions, page 251. Okay, out of this book, chapter 15, they're quoting from another book, Oriental Religions, page 251. The Seleucids were Antiochus. These were Antiochus' fathers. Because it says here, he shall not regard the God of his fathers. The Seleucids believed in Chaldean astrology. So we just read Antiochus uplifted Jupiter. That wasn't the God of his fathers. That was the gods of the Greeks, the Zeus. The God of Antiochus' fathers practiced the Chaldean mysteries. They were associated with Babylon and the Medes and the Persians. They kept that old rites of the Chaldees. The Seleucids believed in Chaldean astrology and the kings of commune, as well as a great number of Syrian cities, had the signs of the zodiac and emblems on their coins. It is certain that the pseudoscience penetrated into those regions long before the Hellenistic period. Chaldeanism modified Semitic paganism. The researchers of Assyriologists, or the researchers who research Assyrian archaeology, have shown that its ancient worship persisted under the Seleucids. What ancient worship? The ancient worship of the Chaldees. I'm reading this to show you that Antiochus' fathers worshiped the Chaldean superstitions. Now, out of this article here, I'm going to continue. No. That's it. For the sake of it, that's it. I think we made the point there. The Seleucid believed in the Chaldean astrology, and the kings of the commune, as well as a great number of Syrian cities, had signs of the zodiac and emblems on their coins. It is certain that this pseudoscience penetrated into those regions. Antiochus followed the religion or the god of the Greeks. not the God of his fathers. Just as what Maccabees is saying. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers. This was, in actuality, the chief god in the Chaldean religion is Tammuz, which is actually Nimrod. Antiochus IV didn't regard him. And it also says here, he shall not regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women. He shall not regard the desire of women, which we read that Antiochus actually was pretty much, he discriminated against women. They wasn't allowed into his what did they call it? When he had his different parties and the games, the women were not allowed in his exhibitions. And whenever he was doing something, it was just only men involved. But still, the desire of women also I have found in something else. In the context of him not honoring any gods. He didn't honor the Tammuz, which was the chief deity of the Chaldeans, in which the Seleucids worship. Nor the desire of women, nor any god. For he shall magnify himself above all. So he magnified himself, but all of the gods, all of the people of the nations had to obey him. In that context, he magnified himself above all. Okay? But pertaining to this other one, that he shall not regard the desire of women. Let's go to the book Josephus to show you. When you say the desire of women, that's taking us into something else. What is the desire of women in the context of these gods? Well, this is something interesting. We're going to go to the book of Josephus, Antiquities. Antiquities, book 12, chapter 9. Antiquities, book 12, chapter 9. And notice what we find here. He didn't allow women's exhibition, number one. But this is something different when he shall not regard the desire of women. This is in the same text where he shall not regard any gods. So what do we find here? Chapter 9 and book 12, the Antiquity of the Jews. It reads, section 1. About this time, it was that King Antiochus IV, as he was going over the upper countries, heard that there was a very rich city in Persia called Elamias, and therein a very rich temple of Diana. This is a temple of women, temple prostitutes. Let's see if he regarded this god, this woman deity. Let's see if he regarded her, or the desire of women. Okay, this was the temples. This was a women's temple. So he heard there was a very rich temple at temple of Diana, and it was full of all sorts of donations dedicated to it, as also weapons and breastplates, which upon inquiry he found had been left there by Alexander, the son of Philip, king of Macedonia. And being incited by these motives, he went in haste to Elamias and assaulted it and besieged it. He didn't care. He didn't give a damn what religion. He didn't give a damn what your fathers believed in. Whether it was this temple of Diana in which the women regarded, okay, the temple of Diana with the temple prostitutes, he didn't care. He didn't care if it was the Jewish temple with the God of Israel. He didn't give a damn. He didn't care. He didn't regard any God. He didn't regard the God of his fathers. He had all of because he ruled Syria. All right? That was his station. That was his headquarters. All of them changed their religion. Like Matthias said, all the heathen changed their religion and listened to Antiochus. He exalted himself above all gods in the context of every other person's God who they acknowledged and whom he didn't. His authority was above theirs. His authority was above their God authority. He said, listen to me, not them. And so he see this temple of Diana where he didn't regard the desire of women. He went down to the temple of Diana, bunch of temple prostitutes all up in there. He went in there to ransack it and besieged it to take the gold and silver. It wasn't holy to him. He didn't regard it. Just as he said, he didn't regard the God of his fathers. He rejected the worship of Tammuz and the Chaldean mysteries. He didn't desire the desire of women. He excluded women from his exhibitions. And when it came down to the temple of Diana, he besieged that and robbed that temple. Nor regard any god. He didn't care about the Hebrews' God. He didn't care about none of the gods. For he shall magnify himself above all. It was all about Antiochus. All about Antiochus. Still we see that this is going right in line. It hasn't changed the subject from Antiochus yet. It hasn't taken us into the future yet. Verse 38. But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces. In his estate shall he honor the God of forces. He done magnify himself above all gods. He done spoke marvelous things against the God of gods, which is the God of Israel. And how was that? I mean, people like, well, you know what? Look, when he took swine's broth and sprinkled it all over the temple. He didn't regard the God of Israel. His actions he said he's going to turn Jerusalem, which is the city of the living God, he's going to turn that into a common burial place. He spoke great things against the God of Israel through his deeds and actions. And even saying that he's going to turn, and when we finish this off, you're going to see this was one of the last things he declared. He's going to turn the holy city into a common burial place, to a place of uncleanness. His pride in his heart where the waters and the lands, he was greater than that. All of this is speaking against the God of Israel. And his pride, that's what he did. He spoke against the God of gods in his endeavors. So he didn't regard any God. But what did he do? Verse 38, but he in his estate shall he honor the God of forces. The God of forces. A God whom his fathers knew not, shall he honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and pleasant things. What God did his fathers know? He said the gods whom his fathers knew not. Let's go to 2 Maccabees 6. We read it already in the Commonwealth. And I'll read it again just for the record. When we was talking about how Antiochus excluded women. Well, what was he doing? He had exhibitions. In chapter 10, page 258 of the Commonwealth by John. He said he outdid all of his predecessors in the splendor of the games, which he celebrated at Delphi, in honor of Jupiter Olympus. That's Zeus. That's Zeus. His fathers didn't know nothing about Zeus. Antiochus' fathers believed in the Chaldean astrology. They didn't know nothing about Zeus. He introduced Zeus. Antiochus did. And this is what he explained. He honored a strange God whom he shall acknowledge with increase in glory. And in fact, that's verse 39. Verse 38 says he shall honor him with gold, silver, and precious stones. Same thing. Verse 39 is going to be dealing with the same thing. But we're not dealing with the Pope here. We're still looking at Antiochus. Let's go now further into this first Maccabees. 2 Maccabees 6. 2 Maccabees 6. Let's go to 2 Maccabees chapter 6. And we're working our way out of this chapter. We had to take this because people have questions on it. And so we figured that Most High willing, he give us the time to be able to put this out for people who's searching. So 2 Maccabees chapter 6, and I'll start reading at verse 1, reads this. Not long after this, the king, which is Antiochus, sent an old man of Athens to compel the Jews to depart from the laws of their fathers and not to live after the laws of God. This we've been reading. and to pollute also the temple in Jerusalem, and to call it the temple of Jupiter Olympus, and that in Gerizim of Jupiter, the defender of strangers, as they did desire that dwelt in the place. Because we could read a few other accounts where the Samaritans, out of the book of Josephus, the Samaritans wrote a letter talking against the Jews. In fact, let's read it, just for the record. Since we put it in there, just for the record. Antiquities, book 12. Antiquities of the Jews, book 12, chapter 5. And this is from the Samaritans. Verse 5. When the section 5, chapter 5, book 12, chapter 5, section 5. When the Samaritans saw the Jews under these sufferings, they no longer confessed they were of their kindred. So they didn't want to be remember how the Samaritans always want to be with the Israelites? Abraham, my father, and all this, all that went out the window when they seen the Israelites being persecuted. They no longer confessed they were of their kindred, nor that the temple on Mount Gerizim belonged to Almighty God. This was according to their nature, as we have already shown. And they now said that they were a colony of Medes and Persians, and indeed they were a colony of theirs. So they sent ambassadors to Antiochus, and an epistle whose contents are these. Quote, to King Antiochus, God Epiphanes. They call it Antiochus God. See how he was magnified above all other gods? A memorial from the Zidonians, who lived at Shechem. Now upon the just treatment of these wicked Jews, this is their letter. Those that manage their affairs, supposing that we were kin to them, and practice as they do, make us liable to the same accusations, although we are originally Zidonians, and is evident from the public records. We therefore beseech thee, our benefactor and savior, to give order to Apollonius the governor of this part of the country, and to Nachor, you'll read about them in the book of Maccabees, a procurator to thy affairs, to give us no disturbance, nor to lay to our charge what the Jews are accused for, since we are aliens from their nation and from their customs. But let our temple, notice this, let our temple, which at present hath no name at all, be named the temple of Jupiter Helleneus. Name our temple after the temple of Zeus. So Antiochus magnified the God whom his fathers didn't know, which was Tammuz of the Chaldean mysteries. Antiochus honored Jupiter, the god Zeus, and he got all of the heathen doing that, worshiping Jupiter. He got the Israelites worshiping Jupiter, and he honored Jupiter with silver and gold. All you got to do is pretty much type that in. Okay, that is what he was. That is not hard to find. That how Antiochus honored Jupiter. That's not hard to find at all. So, however, this is what is going on. In his estate shall he honor the god of forces. This is still Jupiter, the god of fortresses. This is Zeus. This is whom they honored with the eagle. This is the god that the Romans legions honored, who led their armies. This is the god of forces, a strange god, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. He shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. Because when he's saying them, when you bring in Zeus, you bring in a whole Greek pantheon. You bring in all of them. Mercury, the rest of them. Zeus was the chief. Antiochus took on this faith while he was a prisoner at Rome. Okay, he learned about the Hellenistic culture and he loved it. So we still read about Antiochus. The strange god was Zeus. He tried to make everybody worship Zeus. And he exalted himself above all other gods just to give the people Zeus, the God whom his fathers haven't known. He didn't regard the God of his fathers. He didn't regard the desire of women. He desecrated the temple at Diana. He didn't regard none of it. Now, we go into verse 40. Well, let's finish off verse 39. And he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. So, this is coming down to the close of his time, okay? And one of the last things he did do before he was expelled was try to divide the land for gain. And we will find this to be true when we go and take our books to, if we go to 1 Maccabees, chapter, 1 Maccabees, chapter 3. We go to 1 Maccabees. We're gonna go back to 2 Maccabees, but we're gonna go to 1 Maccabees, chapter 3. Notice this. 1 Maccabees, let's get there. And let's see if we can still line this up with Antiochus. 1 Maccabees, chapter 3, and I want to begin reading at verse 35. And it reads, 1 Maccabees, chapter 3, verse 35, to wit, that he should send an army against them. In fact, let's start at verse 33. He was, let me see. Verse 31. Wherefore, being greatly perplexed in his mind, Antiochus, he determined to go into Persia. We're going ahead of ourselves, but this is the close of his reign. There to take the tributes of the countries and to gather much money. He left Lysias, a nobleman, and one of blood royal, to oversee the affairs of the king, from the river Euphrates unto the borders of Egypt, and to bring up his son Antiochus until he came again. Moreover, he delivered unto him the half of his forces, the elephants, and gave him charge of all things that he would have done also concerning them that dwell in Judah and Jerusalem. Yeah, this was the last. We're gonna read as we close out. This was his last effort to destroy Jerusalem. After the Maccabees got independence and got the temple back, and his robbery of the temple of Diana, he besieged it, but however, it failed. Cats came and started chasing him and wind up, spoiling his efforts. He learned the exploits of the Maccabees, and he was very upset. And so he sent his ambassador or nobleman, Lysias. We're going to get to it, though. But right now, we're looking at something else. Verse 35. Verse 34, moreover, he delivered unto him the half of his forces and the elephants, and gave him charge of all things he would have done, all as also concerning them that dwell in Judah and Jerusalem. To wit, that he should send an army against them and destroy the root out of the strength of Israel and the remnant of Jerusalem, and take away their memorial from that place. This was speaking against the God of Israel again. Verse 36. And that he should place strangers in all their quarters and divide their land by lot. This is what he decided or wanted to do. And so the king took the half of the forces, and he took the half of the forces that remained, departed from Antioch, his royal city, the 147th year, having passed the river Euphrates, he went through the high countries. And that's what they did in the beginning, is begin to divide the land they tried to divide the land of Judah and Jerusalem by lot. And this is what Daniel was explaining. That he shall honor the strange gods, and at the same time, he shall divide the land for gain. And remember what was going on. A man was hurting for money. Okay, that's what we read in Maccabees. 1 Maccabees 3 and 3. 1 Maccabees chapter 3, and when we started at verse 31, he was greatly perplexed in his mind and determined to go to Persia, there to take tributes of the country and to gather much money. So he's trying to get some money. through all of his war, his failures, he needs some money. So he going to tell his Lysias to, when he invades Jerusalem, divide the land by lot. And this is what Daniel was explaining as well, bringing as much detail as he can in this invasion. He actually brought that in as well, but began to explain why he divided the land by lot. Verse 39 in Daniel 11, thus shall he do according to most strongholds with a strange god, which was Zeus, Jupiter, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. He shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. He sent his ambassador to divide up, to begin to divide up Palestine. You read the book of Maccabees, you'll see how far they got with that, because eventually they still had trouble with the invasion, but after Antiochus died, a lot of it cooled down. Okay, but they still had trouble with the invasion of different parts of Palestine. But they sought to divide the land for gain. That's verse 39. According to Maccabees 3 from 35 to 36, yes, Antiochus sent his general down to Jerusalem to divide the land by lot, just as Daniel said. Now verse 40 is going to recap again how we've been recapping. Verse 40 is going to recap. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him. Now you have Porphyry. He was a historian who declared, his interpretation is that Antiochus invaded Egypt again. And you could find him with Jerome, Porphyry versus the Christians. He didn't believe the Bible. He seen that Daniel fit so well that he didn't believe the school of thought of Jerome. So Porphyry said that he invaded Egypt again, but we don't see that necessarily. Nor can we really find it anywhere else in history, but Porphyry says it. And a lot of his works was destroyed. And you might wonder why, because he actually has a lot of this history too, that this was Antiochus. You might wonder why a lot of his works has been destroyed. But anyhow, what we do see, at the time of the end, the king shall push at him. They're going to recapitulate what already happened. At the time of the end, the king of the south shall push at who? Antiochus. And this is what happened. Now, we go back and look at this in history. We gotta look at it in history what began to happen. Because now he's coming to an end. Now they're going to go back and review what had happened to cause this, which actually led to the Jerusalem invasion. Because if it wasn't for Egypt started the antagonism against Antiochus. And this led into his invasion. As he was going to attack Egypt, he made detours and attacked Jerusalem. So now they're going to show it was the king of the south towards the end of this vision, because they ran it all the way down from Ptolemy the first and Seleucid the first, ran it all the way down. So towards the end of this vision, the king of the south shall push at the king of the north. And during these days, it was Antiochus the IV and Ptolemy the VI and his brother Ptolemy the VII, or Euergetes. Notice this. Verse 40. The king of the south shall push at him. Now, this is out of Britannica Micropedia Volume 1. Under Antiochus IV. It reads, early career. Antiochus was the third son of Antiochus the III, or the Great. After his father's defeat by the Romans in 190 to 189, he served as hostage for his father in Rome from 189 to 175, where he learned to admire Roman institutions and policies. His brother, King Seleucus IV, exchanged him for Demetrius. Demetrius was Seleucus IV's son. Exchanged him for Demetrius, the son of Seleucus IV. And after Seleucus IV was murdered by Heliodorus, which was his minister, a usurper, Antiochus IV, in turn ousted him, or he ousted Heliodorus. During this period of uncertainty, now, Since all this was going on, Seleucus the IV died. Antiochus was hostage at Rome. Or should I say, Seleucus the IV not just died, but he was assassinated by one of his ministers, Heliodorus. When this turmoil was taking place in Syria, notice what the Egyptians did, because it said in verse 40, at the time of the end, the king shall push at him. So they're actually making reference back up to verse 24. This is when it began to talk about these invasions. Okay? Or even verse 22. All right. So when the Egyptians, taking it back to verse 22, when they seen this happening, or this unrest going on in Syria, notice this. During this period of uncertainty in Syria, the guardians of Ptolemy IV, the Egyptian ruler, laid claim to cold Syria, Palestine, and Phoenicia, which Antiochus III had conquered. Both the Syrian and Egyptian parties appealed to Rome for help, but the Senate refused to take sides. So now they seen this turmoil in Egypt. The king of the south, or the government of the south, the Ptolemy government, seeing the disruption in Syria, or the king of the north, they pushed at him. They went to lay claim on cold Syria, which is Lebanon. They went to lay claim on Palestine, Phoenicia, and then they even sought out the Romans to help them. This was the first time this Antiochus was just getting on the throne, and the Egyptians down there plotting to make war to take over the territory that Antiochus the IV father had gained. So just like Daniel is explaining, at the time of the end, the king of the south shall push at him. Even though he was young, his advisors decided, we're going to go take Palestine, Phoenicia, and Lebanon, pushing at Antiochus. This was before Antiochus even decided to do war with them. But notice this. They had appealed to Rome for help, but the Senate refused to take sides. In 173, Antiochus paid the remainder of the war indemnity that had been imposed by the Romans on Antiochus III at the Treaty of Apamea in 188 BC. Antiochus forestalled an Egyptian expedition to Palestine by invading Egypt. So the Egyptians was coming to lay claim to Palestine before Antiochus. While the Syrian government was getting in place, Antiochus was coming to the throne, the Egyptians pushed at him. And Antiochus forestalled the Egyptian expedition to Palestine by invading Egypt himself. He defeated the Egyptians between Pelusium and Mount Cazion, conquered Pelusium in 169, occupied Egypt with the exception of Alexandria, the capital. Ptolemy IV, Antiochus' nephew, Antiochus' sister Cleopatra I had married Antiochus V, and Antiochus contented himself with ruling Egypt. So Ptolemy V and Cleopatra had Ptolemy VI. Cleopatra was Antiochus IV's sister. So he invaded Egypt and took it. And it says here, Antiochus contented himself with ruling Egypt as Ptolemy's guardian, giving Rome no excuse for intervention. And we read that in the earlier chapters. Before you, just giving you a review. What happened? At the time of the end, the king of the south pushed at him. Yeah, they tried to get Lebanon back. They tried to get Palestine and Phoenicia. But when the Egyptians was coming to make war to take Palestine, Antiochus invaded Egypt. And this started the first assault. Because after he invaded Egypt, there was a disruption in Syria. So he went back to Syria. On his way back to Syria, that was the first time he assaulted the temple at Jerusalem and sprinkled swine broth all over the temple grounds. This was before the Maccabean revolt, a year or two before. Confirming what he's saying. Notice, at the time of the end, the king of the south shall push at him. And the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships, and shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. The Egyptians pushed at him twice. The second time, after they tried to regain Lebanon, Palestine, and Phoenicia, when Antiochus was first coming to the throne, that attempt failed. And after that attempt failed, Antiochus captured Ptolemy the VI. Okay? And so therefore, the Alexandrians or the Egyptians decide to push at him again. Notice in the same Micropedia Britannica, Volume 1, Ptolemy the VI in Egypt, Ptolemy the VI made common cause with his brother and sister, and sent and renewed requests to Rome for aid. And Antiochus prepared for battle. The fleet of Antiochus won a victory at Cyprus, whose governor surrendered the land to him. Notice what's happening. They pushed at Antiochus again. This time he came back and not only conquered Pelusium, he retained Palestine, he retained Phoenicia, he also took Cyprus at this time. It says here, the fleet of Antiochus won a victory at Cyprus. This is through ships. Remember he said here, he should come with a whirlwind with chariots of horsemen and with many ships. Antiochus' ships took over Cyprus. And when he took over Cyprus, according to the encyclopedia, the governor surrendered the island to him. And Antiochus invaded Egypt again in 168 and demanded that Cyprus and Pelusium be succeeded to him. Occupied Lower Egypt and camped outside Alexandria, the cause of the Ptolemies seemed lost. Just like 40 was saying. He came like a whirlwind with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries and overflow and pass over. That's what he did. And verse 41, it reads, he shall also enter the glorious land. And that's what he did after Antiochus left Egypt. After Antiochus had departed out of Egypt, we can read a quick history of it in John's Commonwealth. After he had left Egypt, after that first invasion, after the first invasion of Egypt, it tells us here, let's see here. In the year 170, or 141 or 142 in this, according to the era of the Seleucids, Antiochus led his army along the coast through Palestine and Arabia and Petria, and defeated the Egyptians between Mount Chaos and the city of Pelusium. In the spring of 169, Antiochus undertook a second expedition against the Egyptians and attacked them by sea and land, overflowing, passing over. He defeated the Egyptian army on the frontiers and took Pelusium, and we read in the encyclopedia he took Cyprus as well. Now notice, after Antiochus invaded Egypt, it says here, a report was spread abroad in Palestine that Antiochus Epiphanes was dead. Upon this, Jason came with 1,000 men of the Ammonites and took possession of Jerusalem. All right? So he began to get news that there was something going on in Jerusalem. Now, what happened was Antiochus plundered the city, because it tells you here, after he overtook Egypt and overflow and pass over, he shall enter also into the glorious land. He did. He entered into Jerusalem. Antiochus plundered the city, slew 80,000 persons, men, women, children, took 40,000 prisoners, and sold many into slavery. As if this were not enough, under the guidance of the high priest Menelaus, he went into the sanctuary, uttering blasphemous language, speaking great things against the God of gods, this we read earlier, okay, and speaking blasphemous language, took away all the gold and silver that he could find there, the golden table, altar, candlesticks, and golden vessels, that he might leave nothing behind. He searched the subterranean vaults, and in this manner collected 1,800 talents of gold, which he carried away. He then sacrificed swine upon the altar, boiled a piece of flesh, and sprinkled the whole temple with the broth of that swine. He appointed Philip the Phrygian, governor of Judah, and Antiochus and Menelaus, governors of Samaria, and confirmed Menelaus in the high priesthood. Just as he said, after he conquered Egypt, both times he invaded Jerusalem. Both times. Okay? When he took Egypt and then the Romans came and intervened, that was the second time he went back and attacked Palestine. So he did enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand. Many countries was overthrown by Antiochus. Many countries were overthrown by Antiochus. Pelusium, which was on a border of Egypt, part of the territory, but it was on a border. We read Cyprus. The governor gave the ruler Antiochus rulership over Cyprus. It says the fleet of Antiochus won a victory at Cyprus, whose governor surrendered the island to him. This is out of Maccabees Volume 1. He maintained Lebanon, Phoenicia, Cyprus. Lebanon is pretty much southern Syria. Egypt, Pelusium, Jerusalem. Antiochus took many countries. Okay? Countries that the Egyptians tried to take back, he possessed them. But Edom, Moab, and Ammon escaped out of his hand. Because in all of his invasions, he never invaded Edom, Moab, and Ammon. And they right in that territory. He had to pass Edom, Moab, and Ammon to go attack Egypt. When he left Egypt to attack Jerusalem, he had to pass Edom, Moab, and Ammon. And it's good reason why he did not attack Edom, Moab, and Ammon. Because they were on his side. When you're talking Edom and Moab, look at this here. Edom, Moab, and Ammon. Let's go briefly look at this in the Apocrypha to show you what we find with this. Who shall escape out of his hand? Edom, Moab, and Ammon. And let's go into 1 Maccabees. 1 Maccabees. And I want chapter 4. 1 Maccabees chapter 4. Let's go into 1 Maccabees chapter 4. And notice this. 1 Maccabees 4 and 61. Notice this. 4 and 61. In fact, I'm going to go up higher so we get the gist of this. Moreover, Judas and his brethren and the whole congregation of Israel ordained that the days of the dedication of the altar should be kept in their season from year to year, by the space of 8 days, from the 25th day of the month Caslu, with myrrh and gladness. At that time also they builded up the Mount Zion with high walls and strong towers round about, lest the Gentiles should come and tread it down as they had done before. Remember, the Gentiles were all on the side of Antiochus. They were under the king's commandment. This is what we've been reading. Even the Samaritans, another territory that gave themselves over to Antiochus, offering to make their temple the temple of Jupiter. But notice, verse 61, and they set there a garrison to keep it, and fortified Bethzura to preserve it, that the people might have a defense against Idumea. Idumea escaped out of Antiochus' hand because they were fighting against the children of Israel. They were fighting on his behalf. So Edom, Moab, and Ammon escaped the terror of Antiochus because they were helping him in fighting against the Jews. They were a part of the nations who were fighting against the Jews. That's why Edom escaped. Look at this. Flip right over to chapter 5. Chapter 5, verse 1. Chapter 5, 1 Maccabees, chapter 5, because we had read First Maccabees 4, starting from verse 59 to 61. Now we're going to read right into chapter 5, verse 1. Now when the nations round about heard that the altar was built and the sanctuary renewed as before, it displeased them very much, because they all converted to Antiochus' way. The Samaritans, all of them. Cyprus fell to them. Many parts of Egypt, Palestinium, Lebanon, Phoenicia, they all fell to him. Many countries was taken by him. Now they were displeased, wherefore they thought to destroy the generation of Jacob that was among them. And thereupon they began to slay and destroy the people. Then Judas fought against the children of Esau and Idumea at Arabatine, because they besieged Israel. And he gave them a great overthrow, and abated their courage, and took their spoils. Also he remembered the injury of the children of Ben, who had a snare and an offense unto the people, in that they lay in wait for them in the ways. He shut them up, therefore, in the towers, and encamped against them, and destroyed them utterly, and burnt the towers of that place with fire, all that were therein. So we still see Idumeans fighting against the children of Israel. Now notice this. Afterward he passed over to take the children of Ammon, where he found a mighty power and much people with Timotheus their captain. So he fought many battles with them, till at length they were discomfited before him, and he smote them. Ammon. And when you talking Ammon, you counting his brother, Moab. So Edom, Moab, and Ammon escaped the terror of Antiochus. They were his allies, people. Still, this is still dealing with Antiochus. This all lines up with the history of the Maccabean revolt and the invasion of Antiochus. But notice what it's saying. He shall enter to the glorious land, which he did. He attacked Jerusalem. Many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand. So Palestine was overthrown. Cyprus was overthrown. Egypt was overthrown. Lebanon was still seized by him, which is called Syria. Phoenicia was overthrown. And they penetrated all the way. Antiochus IV penetrated all the way down into Alexandria, almost into all the way down to southern Egypt. Many countries were overthrown by him. He shall enter to the glorious land. Many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand. Edom was an ally. Ammon was an ally. And Ammon, they didn't mention Moab in the Apocrypha, but Edom, Moab, and Ammon, they pretty much are. Moab and Ammon is together. So, and Moab and the chief of the children of Ammon, Antiochus never attacked them. He never attacked them. So when it's saying they escaped out of his hand, according to history, they did. He never attacked them. Verse 42. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. He did. He stretched forth his hand upon Palestine, Cyprus, and Egypt didn't escape either. This is what he's explaining. We read Egypt did not escape, but he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. That's what we read in the Apocrypha. If we go back, this is exactly what happened. First Maccabees, chapter 1, verse 16. Now when the kingdom was established before Antiochus IV, he thought to reign over Egypt, that he might have dominion over 2 rams. Wherefore he entered into Egypt with a great multitude, with chariots and elephants and horsemen, and a great navy, and made war against Ptolemy, king of Egypt. But Ptolemy was afraid of him, and fled, and many were wounded to death. Thus they, speaking of Antiochus, got the strong cities in the land of Egypt, and he took spoils thereof. And after that, Antiochus had smitten Egypt, returned again in the 143rd year, and went up against Israel and Jerusalem with a great multitude. So he took great spoils, just like he's saying, silver and gold, he brought back treasures that, multitude of treasures out of Egypt. So, starting from verse 40, he's recapping what had taken place. And it said, the Libyans and Ethiopians shall be at his steps. That's right. He invaded Egypt, way into southern Egypt. And the Libyans and the Ethiopians are at southern Egypt. They were at his steps. He never invaded, but they were at his steps. He never made it down that far. But he did take pretty much control over Egypt. He did that which his fathers had not done. Now, what happened in all of these invasions? They're going to start now to bring in more history. After these invasions against Egypt and all of the countries in the territories of the land, verse 44 tells us, but tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. So even though he's taken Egypt, Palestine, Pelusium, Cyprus, southern Lebanon, the Samaritans, they all conform to him. After all of this success, with minor failures when Rome came against him, where he had to relinquish Cyprus, but he wound up invading Jerusalem again. After all of this success, tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. What happened? Notice this. We're getting ready to close out here. If we go to to Tacitus, book 5, section 8, page 662. Tacitus, a Roman historian, wrote about Antiochus as well. Look what he wrote about. Look what he said. Remember, 44 is telling us tidings out of the north and out of the east shall trouble him. And let's see what Tacitus began to inform us on. Notice this. Book 5, section 8. Here he first began to talk about Judea. He said the great part of Judea consists of scattered villages, okay? But he's going to begin to explain down further. King Antiochus strove to destroy the nation. King Antiochus strove to destroy the national superstition and to introduce Greek civilization, but was prevented by his war with the Parthians from at all improving the vilest of nations. So Tacitus hated the Jews too. And he said Antiochus was prevented from improving the Jews from a war in Parthia or Parthians. Is this what happened? That's right. To the east. He said tidings out of the east troubled him. Now if we go, you can find this in Wikipedia. Type in Antiochus Epiphanes final years. Section final years. Parthia was to the east. Tacitus is explaining what stopped Antiochus was tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with a great fury to destroy and to utterly make away many. What happened? During the end of his reign, during all of these wars, he started to get revolts in Armenia, which is north, and Parthians, which is in the east. Notice this. Taking advantage of Antiochus' western problems, the war with Egypt, Palestine, Syria, Kittim, Romans troubling him. Taking advantage of Antiochus' western problems, King Mithridates the first of Parthia attacked from the east and seized the city of Herat in 167 BC, disrupting the direct trade route to India and effectively splitting the Greek world into two. Recognizing the potential danger in the east, tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. So Antiochus recognized the trouble that Mithridates is starting in the east. Recognizing the potential danger in the east, but unwilling to give up control of Judea, because this was the problem in the west. This is when Antiochus had invaded the glorious land. He didn't want to get a glorious land up. Tidings out of the east. He was unwilling to give up control of Judea. Antiochus sent a commander named Lysias to deal with the Maccabees, because this was the same time the Maccabees was regaining territory, while Antiochus was also trying to subdue that whole western region. While the king himself led the main Seleucid army against the Parthians, their initial success in the eastern campaign, including a reoccupation, he had to reoccupy Armenia. Antiochus died suddenly of a disease in 164 BC. So he had to go, he himself, Antiochus, led his army to go fight in the east and to reoccupy Armenia. Armenia is to the north. Look at the map. Armenia is to the north and Parthians is to the east. Just like verse 44 is saying, tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. He's going to be furious. So he's going to go attack Mithridates the first of Parthia, and he's going to go reoccupy Armenia, because the tidings out of the east, which was the Parthians and the Armenians to the north, troubled him. We'll read another account. This is out of Antiochus Epiphanes encyclopedia article from Merriam-Webster. It says here, in 164, Judas Maccabee and the anti-Greek Jews conquered Judea except for the Acra in Jerusalem. Tore down the altars of Zeus and reconsecrated the temple. Antiochus then turned to defending his empire against the Parthians in the east, regained Armenia, which is in the north, and went on to Arabian coast before dying in Persis. Armenia and the Parthians. Tidings out of the east, which is the Parthians, and tidings out of the north. He had to go back and reoccupy Armenia. So Armenia, Parthians. It said many countries fell by him. He said he shall enter the glorious land and many countries shall be overthrown. Parthians, Medes, Cyprus, Lebanon, Egypt. Just like the record's been showing us, this is Antiochus. We haven't found where we should fit in a pope yet. We all the way down to verse 44. We haven't found a pope. All this lines up with Antiochus. Verse 45. And then we didn't put everything in here. People have questions about it. Leave questions. If something that you need more clarity on, call the number or, leave a comment for a question. Now verse 45 tells us what? He shall plant the tabernacle of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end and none shall help him. So, Antiochus, it said he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. What happened? Remember, when Antiochus went to reconquer Armenia, and he went back to reconquer the Parthians, or the Parthians, what happened? We're going to read the last account. In fact, I think they even talked about it in Britannica. Yes, it did. In the final years. Notice this. Taking advantage, because 44 and 45 is going together in Daniel 11. Taking advantage of Antiochus' western problems, King Mithridates the first of Parthia attacked from the east and seized the city of Herat in 167, disrupting the direct trade route in India and effectively splitting the Greek world in two. Recognizing the potential danger in the east, but unwilling to give up control of Judea. Remember, it said, he shall plant the tabernacle of his palace between the seas and in the glorious holy mountain. He didn't want to give up Judea, which is the glorious holy mountain. But he had to go back and get his territory in Armenia and Parthia and in Parthia. Okay? So what did he do? Antiochus sent a commander named Lysias to deal with the Maccabees. Lysias stayed in the glorious holy mountain. He set up the tents of the palace of Antiochus, which is none other than military tents. He was sent back to the glorious holy mountain, while the king himself led the main Seleucid army against the Parthians and the reoccupation of Armenia. So when Antiochus went to the north and to the east, he sent his tents and his tabernacles down under the command of Lysias into the glorious holy mountain. In fact, it also reads it here in the Maccabean Britannica as well, but I think we made the point. We're going to read this last one. He shall come to his end. It tells us here, and in fact, it told us Antiochus died suddenly of a disease while this was going on. Maccabees, when we read Maccabees, it tell you the same thing. 2 Maccabees chapter 9. 1 Maccabees should be chapter 5 or 6. It talks about the decline and the disease of Antiochus when he tried to make peace with the Jews, when he was struck by this terrible disease while he was on a campaign against Parthians and Armenia. He gained the territory back, but after that he got plagued with a disease. In fact, I'll read it out of the Micropedia Volume 1. Antiochus then mounted a campaign against the Parthians, who were threatening the empire in the east, recovered the income from that area, forced Artaxias of Armenia, who had defected, meaning he tried to revolt, Armenia is in the north, to recognize his suzerainty, founded the city of Antioch on the Persian Gulf, set out on an expedition to the Arabian coast, and at the end of 164, after he gained control again of Armenia and the Parthians, he set on an expedition to Arabia. And at the end of 164, died of an illness at Tabe. And that's what it says. He shall plant the tabernacle of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. Now let's just read this last part about him coming to his end. We explained it, but we're going to read it out of John John's history, the Hebrew Commonwealth, chapter 10, page 271. It reads, Antiochus was obliged to weaken his forces by dividing them. This is after the Persians and the Armenians attacked. Okay? In fact, we'll read from the top. When Antiochus heard of these successes of the Jews, he determined to exterminate the whole nation and give their country to others. But his treasures were exhausted by his expensive games and extravagant donations, and he found it difficult to raise a large army. And at the same time, he received intelligence that the Persians and Artaxias, the tributary king of Armenia, had refused to make him any more remittances. This was the effect of his religious persecutions, which could not be odious in the eyes of those Magigesnians, who abhorred the worship of idols. Accordingly, Antiochus was obliged to weaken his forces by dividing them. One division of his army he sent to Judea, confirming. He said, he shall plant the tabernacle of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, but he shall come to his end. So he sent an army to Judea under the command of Lysias, the nobleman of royal blood. And the other he himself led to Armenia in the year 165, after he had made Lysias regent of the countries west of the Euphrates. Tidings out of the east and west, Armenia and Parthia. He got intelligence that the Israelites was succeeding in their revolt with great fury. In verse 44, he went to utterly destroy and make away many. He wanted to go down there and destroy Jerusalem, but he had to deal with the problem in the east and in the north. After he finished dealing with that problem, he went and fell to sicknesses. But verse 45 says, he shall plant the tabernacle of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. We understand that to be Jerusalem. And the tabernacle of Antiochus' palace, he sent Lysias to go to Jerusalem because he didn't want to lose that territory, and he sent the tents of his military down to Jerusalem to occupy Jerusalem, the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end. Antiochus was wind up dying of a terrible disease, which you could read in the book of Maccabees. Verse 1 to verse 45. And we can carry it into chapter 12, but that's not a discussion today. Verses 1 to 45 is the historical record of the battle of the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, all the way down to Antiochus IV and his attack against Egypt and the glorious holy land, Jerusalem, and the Maccabean revolt, and the saints who withstood and died. Some survived, some died in this revolt, standing for the word of the Creator. Daniel 11 being in the future, talking about a future antichrist, we don't see it. And there, because the texts haven't revealed that. And this, we're putting out there for people who saying it, show us when it ever changed from dealing with the Macedonians' battle, internal battle between the king of the north and king of the south, and Antiochus' attack against the Jews. We are not here to prophesy to you. We are here to read the Bible to you, or to search history and search our biblical text to see what is true and what is false. And if you have been reading through with us, maybe you also can conclude that there is no room for a Pope of Rome. This abomination of desolation that you read here in Daniel 11 was making reference to 1 Maccabees chapter 1, verse 54. This isn't the abomination of desolation that Christ was talking about in Matthew chapter 24. With that, I'm signing off. We hope that all of you who sincerely searching the word, that the Most High bless you and keep you and give you understanding of his word, so that your eyes can be open and illuminated to see what is lying before us in these days to come, and not be fooled by false prophets to be searching for something that will not materialize as they claimed it to be. So with that, we say shalom and peace to you all to the next time.